The Serengeti stretched under an unforgiving sun, the sky blazing white as heat shimmered across the plains. Grass lay flattened, brittle and dry, the air heavy with stillness. Yet above, shadows wheeled, vultures circling low, anticipating what was unfolding below. Beneath them, terror already played its part. A lone lion cub staggered across the cracked earth, his golden coat dulled by dust, his legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion. Too young to defend himself, too far from his pride to call for help. He was left exposed to the raw cruelty of the wild. In the distance, hyenas approached, their laughter rolling across the open land like a sinister drumbeat. The cub's cries rose into the air, thin and desperate, piercing the quiet like an alarm. Here, survival wasn't promised. On this day, it seemed almost certain that death had already chosen its prey. The cub stumbled, his small body shaking as he collapsed into the dust. His breath rattled in his chest. He looked up, helpless, surrounded by jaws that promised no mercy. His fragile life hung by a thread.
The hyenas pressed closer, their heads low, shoulders twitching in unison. They moved with a grim choreography, each flick of the tail, each shuffle of paws signaling a strategy built on hunger and instinct. One lunged, teeth snapping with a sharp crack, missing only by inches as the cub rolled clumsily onto his side. Another shifted quickly to block his retreat, her lips pulled back, saliva dripping from bared teeth. Their laughter filled the air, a chorus of malice that made the ground feel alive with menace. The cub tried to roar, but what came out was no more than a hoarse squeak, swallowed by the dust. His paws scrabbled helplessly, but every attempt to rise only left him weaker. The ring of predators grew smaller, the circle closing. The vultures wheeled tighter above. Death pressed close on every side, eager to claim the final act of this struggle. The cub cried out again, the sound breaking across the plain like a plea no one could answer. Dust coated his muzzle, choking the sound until it dissolved into a hoarse gasp. His body sagged as if each breath carried the weight of survival itself. The hyenas slowed their advance, savoring the despair, their eyes glinting with cruel certainty. They were no longer reckless scavengers, they were executioners, reading one another's signals, pressing the cub into a cage of fear. One paw slipped, his small frame collapsing once more, and for an instant he didn't move. The vultures dipped lower, their black shadows stretching like long fingers across the earth. Hunger, death, and despair fused into a single rhythm. It seemed certain the plains would swallow another small life that day. And then the rhythm changed. A shadow fell across the circle, larger and darker than any bird overhead.
The ground trembled slightly, a low vibration carried through dust and stone. The hyenas stiffened, their laughter faltering as the massive silhouette of a giraffe broke the edge of the clearing. Towering above the scene, his long neck arched, nostrils flaring, muscles coiled with strength few dared challenge. Atlas was no predator, no rival hunter, yet his very presence shattered the rhythm of the hunt. He moved closer, each step pressing heavy into the soil, ears twitching at the cries of the cub. The hyenas growled, uneasy, torn between hunger and fear. They knew the danger. One strike from those hooves could shatter bone, end lives instantly. The cub blinked weakly in the sudden shade cast over him, the air thick with tension. Time itself seemed to pause. Above, even the vultures slowed their circling. Nature held its breath, waiting for a decision no one could predict. Atlas lowered his neck, nostrils flaring as he studied the trembling cub at his feet. His dark liquid eyes reflected a strange mixture: curiosity, caution, and something unspoken. The hyenas bristled, pacing wider now, their laughter replaced by guttural growls.
Hunger pressed them forward, but instinct dragged them back. They understood the power of giraffes, the lethal precision hidden in their spindly legs. Still, the cub was so close, so fragile, its breath shallow and fading. One hyena edged nearer, ears pinned, eyes flicking toward the giant looming overhead. Atlas shifted, hooves pressing deeper into the earth, body tense with silent potential. The standoff grew heavier, thick enough to choke. The cub whimpered, a thin thread of sound that pierced the moment like a plea. Atlas's ears flicked at the sound, and for the first time the balance of predator and prey seemed to tremble on the edge of change.
The hyenas hesitated, their coordination fraying as unease crept into their ranks. They were creatures of persistence, masters of pressure, but now their hunger met something it could not measure: sheer size, unpredictable and unyielding. Their bodies twitched, circling wider, probing for weakness, their growls deepening with frustration. One lunged again, snapping at empty air near Atlas's leg, testing the giant's nerve. The giraffe's muscles coiled, weight shifting dangerously across his haunches, ready to strike. Dust rose as his hoof lifted slightly, a silent threat carrying the promise of devastation. The cub lay curled at his feet, chest rising shallowly, a fragile center of this gathering storm. For the first time, the hyenas faltered. Their laughter thinned into uneasy silence. The vultures wheeled higher, sensing the rhythm of the hunt collapsing. Nature itself seemed to wait, unsure whether the circle would shatter or ignite into sudden violence. Atlas stamped suddenly, his hoof striking the earth with a crack like thunder. Dust exploded into the air, scattering across the hyenas' faces, forcing them back with startled snarls. The vibration echoed through the soil, rattling the cub's frail body as he gasped for air. For a moment, the predators scattered wide, their eyes flicking with uncertainty. They had felt the power hidden in those legs, power that could crush their skulls in a heartbeat. But hunger clawed at them relentlessly, dragging them back toward the trembling cub. They circled again, more cautious now, their movements jittery, their rhythm broken. Atlas loomed over them all, his body angled protectively between the hyenas and the cub. His nostrils flared, breath steaming in the hot air. Above, vultures shrieked and shifted higher, unsettled. The Serengeti, once certain of death, now held in its balance, a question never asked before.
The cub stirred faintly, his paw stretching weakly toward the dust, his small body trembling under the shadow of Atlas. His eyes, half closed, reflected confusion more than fear, as if sensing that something far larger than himself had chosen to stand guard. The giraffe bent low, his long face near the cub, ears twitching at every sound. It was a strange alignment, predator and prey set against the rhythm of the plains. The hyenas, no longer laughing, paced restlessly, torn between the lure of meat and the threat towering over them. For once their confidence faltered, their snarls cracked into hesitation, their tails lowered, steps dragging. Above, the vultures broke their tight circles, drifting uncertainly in widening arcs. What was meant to be a certain kill had turned into a fragile standoff, its outcome held not by hunger or instinct, but by the strange choice of a towering guardian. From the grasses at the clearing's edge, another figure emerged, shifting the balance once more. Nalaine, a scarred lioness, her ribs sharp beneath her skin, prowled cautiously into view. Hunger burned in her amber eyes, but something else lingered, recognition of the cub's cries, recognition of duty not bound by blood. The hyenas stiffened, their chorus rising again, mocking this new contender. Their snarls turned sharper, testing the strength of lion and giraffe alike. Atlas stayed motionless, his shadow stretched long, his hoof still poised. The cub whimpered again, his voice rasping across the plain like a thread of life. Nalaine crouched low, her muscles coiled, tail flicking, torn between her own hunger and the fragile kinship of her kind. For a breathless moment, the Serengeti paused once more. Predator, prey, protector, all aligned around a cub whose survival was now the heart of this fragile battlefield.
The hyenas paced wider, uneasy with two guardians now before them. Their laughter faltered into a chorus of growls, sharp and mocking, yet strained. Atlas stood immovable, his vast frame blotting the sun. His shadows stretched like a shield, swallowing the trembling cub. Nalaine crouched lower, amber eyes burning, every muscle wound tight. The cub whimpered again, so faint it nearly dissolved in the wind, yet it drew every eye to its fragile body. The hyenas snapped and shifted, but hesitation spread among them like a disease. Their rhythm was broken, their confidence fractured by the giraffe's towering defiance and the lioness's steady resolve. Hunger dragged them forward, but instinct held them back. For the first time, the balance of the plains did not belong to predators. Instead, it hovered in the hands, or hooves, of an unlikely alliance. Death still lingered, but survival had begun to take its place. Dust swirled in the air, clinging to the cub's fur as he shivered weakly at Nalaine's paws. She pressed lower, tail flicking with agitation, torn between her own hunger and a strange duty that pulled her closer to the fragile life. The hyenas sensed her hesitation, their laughter returning in cruel bursts. They fanned into a crescent, their bodies weaving in and out like shadows testing for weakness. Atlas shifted, hooves stamping once, the earth cracking beneath the force. The sound silenced the pack for a heartbeat. The giraffe's head lowered again, nostrils flaring at the scent of dust, blood, and fear. Above, vultures spiraled lower, their shadows falling across the standoff. Each moment stretched like thread ready to snap. The cub gasped, his small chest rising unevenly. Nalaine's ears twitched. Hunger screamed at her ribs, but something stronger stirred within her. A choice beyond instinct was being written.
From the grass beyond the clearing, another shadow moved. A younger lioness, Suri, lean and strong, padded forward with a deliberate stride. Her golden coat shimmered under the sun, her amber eyes sharp. She wasn't kin, but her scent carried familiarity, perhaps pride's distant bloodline. The hyenas froze briefly, ears twitching at the shift. Division among lions was opportunity. Their mocking laughter swelled louder, sharper, as though to exploit hesitation. Nalaine stiffened at the sight of Suri, her body tightening, not with fear, but with recognition of rivalry. They had crossed before, pride against pride. This moment was no alliance by choice, but survival had its own rules. Suri's gaze locked on the cub, then flicked warily to the older lioness. The fragile thread of trust quivered. The cub whimpered softly, eyes faintly recognizing his kind. For a fleeting moment, both lionesses paused, rivalry pressed aside by the weight of survival. The hyenas pressed closer, sensing the tension between the two lionesses. Their eyes gleamed with opportunity, bodies twitching with hunger. Atlas towered above it all, a sentinel, his vast shadow splitting the battlefield. Suri edged nearer the cub, her muscles taut, her flank brushing his fragile body. Nalaine snarled low, her eyes narrowing at the rival's closeness. Yet in that moment, the cub's feeble breath anchored them both. Hunger and rivalry bent to the faint sound of life struggling to endure. The hyenas regrouped, snapping their jaws, circling tighter, their rhythm returning. Atlas stamped again, dust exploding, scattering them briefly, but still they lingered, unwilling to release the promise of an easy kill. The vultures wheeled lower, their wings cutting shadows like blades across the earth. Two lionesses, rivals by nature, now found themselves side by side. Survival demanded it. And the plains held its breath for what would follow.
Atlas swayed, scanning the horizon with his long neck, ears pinned backward. His nostrils flared at something unseen beyond the heat shimmer.
The hyenas caught the shift, their own growls faltering. Dust trembled faintly along the edge of the horizon. A murmur carried across the plains. Something larger was approaching. The vultures wheeled higher, abandoning the immediate feast for the promise of upheaval. Nalain and Suri stiffened, their amber eyes narrowing at the sight of rising haze. The cub whimpered weakly, pressing his small head against Suri's flank. The hyenas hesitated, their coordination fraying as instinct pulled them to caution. Atlas lifted his head high, his massive body rigid, ears forward. The tremor grew heavier, rolling like distant thunder beneath the ground. The clearing, once locked in fragile stillness, braced itself for another force, one neither predator nor prey had anticipated. Something larger than them all was coming closer. From the horizon, a lone figure emerged, blurred by heat and dust. A man, his skin weathered by sun, his shirt torn and clinging to his back with sweat. His strides were steady, though heavy with fatigue. A herdsman returning from pastures, drawn by the cries that carried across the savannah. He stopped at the rise, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the chaos below. Hyenas stiffened, ears twitching, uneasy. They knew men, unpredictable, dangerous, often deadly. The lionesses stiffened too, their instincts torn between distrust and the possibility of advantage. Atlas only stood taller, folding the herdsman into his silent watch. The man gripped his stick tighter, dust coating his hands. The cub whimpered again, drawing his gaze. He hesitated, every breath weighing the choice: walk away and live, or step closer into the fury of predators for a life not his own.
The man descended slowly, his stick tapping once against stone, the crack echoing through the stillness. The hyenas startled, their bodies twitching as they regrouped, growls rising sharper. They surged forward half a step, mocking the giant and the intruding man. Atlas stamped hard, dust exploding upward, driving them back again. The lionesses crouched low, ready to strike if needed. The cub gasped, his faint breath tethering all sides to his fragile survival. The herdsman steadied himself, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. He had lost calves to hyenas before, but the sound of this cub's cries carved deeper, stirring something stronger than fear. The predator shifted uneasily, reading every move, every hesitation. The vultures screeched above, wings slicing the heated air. At the clearing's heart, the balance of the savannah trembled. The outcome pressed against the will of one man, one giraffe, and two unlikely lionesses. The plains fell into silence again, an uneasy calm broken only by the cub's faint cries. Then, the ground began to tremble. The vibrations grew heavier, steady, rolling like distant thunder. Dust rose in thick plumes across the horizon, swelling with every passing second. The hyenas froze, ears pricked, growls thinning into silence. Atlas lifted his head sharply, nostrils wide, ears forward. Nalain and Suri pressed lower to the earth, their eyes burning with anticipation. The man tightened his grip on his stick, his chest tightening as he recognized the sound. A herd was coming, a living tide of hooves. The vultures spiraled upward in panic, abandoning the scene below. Dust thickened, the rhythm of thunder swelling into a roar. The hyenas faltered, their hunger colliding with instinctive fear. The cub whimpered, pressing into the earth. The savannah braced itself for a storm not of wind, but of muscle and dust.
A wall of wildebeest surged into sight, hundreds pressing together in desperate migration. Their bodies thundered across the plains, dust rising like smoke, drowning the clearing in chaos. The hyenas scattered first, their laughter dissolving into panicked shrieks as they darted for cover.
Vultures rose in black storms, wings thrashing against the roiling air. Atlas stood poised, his massive frame shifting to shield the cub. His long legs anchored deep into the soil, each movement deliberate. Nalain and Suri pressed low to the ground, their bodies trembling against the tide of hooves. The herdsman moved sideways, reading the herd's sweep, steadying himself with his stick. Dust engulfed them all, choking, thick, deafening. The cub lay motionless in the center, hidden within the fortress formed by giraffe, lionesses, and man. Nature's fury surged past, unstoppable, swallowing the horizon in its relentless roar. The clearing dissolved into a storm of survival. Minutes dragged into eternity as the thunder of hooves rolled over the plains. Then suddenly, as it began, the herd passed, their silhouettes dissolving into haze. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the rasp of shallow breaths. Atlas still towered above, his flanks heaving, nostrils flared wide. Nalain rose slowly, her body caked in dust, her amber eyes glowing with exhaustion. Suri nudged the cub gently, her nose brushing his frail body until he stirred weakly. The herdsman lowered his stick, shoulders sagging with relief. The hyenas had vanished into the grass, their confidence shattered by the fury of the herd. The vultures circled high again, distant and hesitant. At the center, the cub blinked, fragile but alive, his tiny body pressed against the lionesses. For a moment, predator and protector, man and beast, all shared the stillness of survival, bound together by the miracle of endurance.
The clearing lay blanketed in silence after the stampede, dust hanging in the air like smoke. Atlas lowered his head, his long neck swaying gently as though releasing the weight of what he had endured. Nalain licked the cub's dusty fur while Suri crouched protectively at his side. The herdsman leaned on his stick, chest rising with heavy breaths, his eyes scanning the grass where hyenas once prowled. No laughter remained, only the quiet pulse of survival. The vultures wheeled far overhead, uncertain whether life or death remained below. Slowly, the cub pressed its small head against Suri's leg, his eyes half open. That faint spark of resilience was enough to shift the moment from despair into hope. The plains, which had witnessed cruelty, now bore the unlikely footprints of guardians who had stood between a fragile life and the jaws of death. Survival had taken root in the dust. The cub stirred again, his sides heaving unevenly, yet alive. His faint cry rose into the still air, soft but steady. Both lionesses turned their heads toward him, their rivalry briefly forgotten. Nalain's ribs lifted with exhaustion, but her gaze softened, no longer at odds with Suri. Atlas stood unmoving, ears twitching, nostrils flaring as if guarding against danger still hidden in the grass. The herdsman crouched low, one hand pressed into the soil, whispering a breathless prayer to the plains. The cub pressed against Suri's chest, recognizing warmth, safety, kinship. Though his strength was small, his survival now bound them together in ways no instinct could deny. Predator, prey, and man had formed a shield around him, not by plan, but by choice. The savannah, so often ruled by hunger, had bent for one heartbeat to mercy. And in that mercy, the cub's story began to change.
The plains never stay still for long. From the distance, faint movement stirred within the tall grass. The herdsman stiffened, his grip on the stick tightening. Atlas raised his head sharply, scanning the horizon. It wasn't the herd returning, nor vultures dropping lower. The hyenas had not vanished entirely. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dusk, pairs of them blinking in the grass, unwilling to surrender. Their laughter had died, but their hunger had not. Nalain snarled low, stepping in front of the cub once more. Suri mirrored her, shoulder to shoulder, though her amber eyes flicked uneasily at her rival. Atlas shifted,
hooves planting firm. The herdsman raised his stick and stamped it once against the earth. The sound carried sharp and clean, a warning etched into the soil. For a long moment, the standoff threatened to return. The cub whimpered softly, holding the balance in his fragile breath. But it wasn't only hyenas that stalked the dusk. From behind the grasses rose a darker figure, a man. Not the herdsman, but another, his boots crunching dry soil, his rifle slung across his shoulder. His eyes scanned the clearing with greed rather than pity. The herdsman's chest tightened. He knew this type, poachers, opportunists who saw life only as prize or profit. The lionesses bristled, ears pinned flat, reading the danger as swiftly as the hyenas had. Atlas stamped, his immense frame blotting the sinking sun. The cub whimpered, pressing against Suri, trembling at the scent of more peril. The poacher smirked, his gaze lingering on the exhausted lionesses and the giraffe's towering body. He saw not a fragile truce, but opportunity. Yet the herdsman stepped forward, planting his stick firmly in the soil. In his sunburned face shone quiet defiance. He would not allow greed to claim what mercy had spared.
The poacher's smirk twisted into contempt. "Step aside." His voice carried harshly across the clearing, though his hands never left the rifle. The herdsman tightened his grip on the stick, his back straightening with resolve. Atlas towered silently, his nostrils flaring at the scent of tension, every muscle coiled. Nelaine bared her teeth, her growl vibrating through the soil. Suri stood alongside her, her tail flicking like a whip. The hyenas lingered at the edge, their yellow eyes gleaming, uncertain whether to side with chaos or retreat. The cub whimpered again, fragile breath lost in the thick silence. Then Atlas took a single step forward. His hoof pressed deep into the earth, the crack echoing like thunder. The poacher froze, hand twitching on the rifle strap. This was no standoff between man and beast. It was a line between greed and guardianship, and the plains themselves seemed to judge. The poacher raised his rifle halfway, daring the line, but Atlas moved first. With a sudden surge of power, the giraffe lashed his leg downward. The earth split under the force, dust exploding upward. The sound cracked like stone breaking, reverberating across the plains. The hyenas scattered instantly, their courage dissolved into shrieks. The poacher stumbled, his rifle clattering to the ground. Nelaine lunged forward, teeth bared, her growl vibrating through his bones. Suri pressed lower, her amber eyes locked in warning. The herdsman lifted his stick, striking the ground again, sealing the moment with human resolve. The poacher's breath caught, his bravado shattered. He staggered backward, eyes darting between the giraffe, the lionesses, and the unyielding man. For the first time, he realized the truth. This was no ordinary gathering of beasts. This was an alliance forged by survival. And against it, greed found no ground to stand. With his rifle abandoned in the dust and fear burning in his eyes, the poacher stumbled back into the tall grass. His boots cracked against dry roots until the sound faded altogether. Atlas lifted his head high, nostrils flaring, his body swaying with quiet triumph. Nelaine lowered herself to the cub, licking his ear as if to remind him that life had been protected once more. Suri pressed closer, no longer rival but ally in the face of danger. The herdsman exhaled, shoulders sagging, the tension slipping from his frame. The hyenas had vanished completely, their laughter erased by the giraffe's thunder. The clearing returned to silence, though now it was no silence of despair, it was peace hard won. The cub stirred again, his tiny paw stretching into the dust. The guardians encircled him, not by blood, not by species, but by choice. And that choice had changed everything. The savannah's dusk deepened, painting the horizon in blood-red streaks. Atlas stood tall at the clearing's heart, his long shadow stretching over the fragile cub. Nelaine and Suri lay side by side, their chests rising with exhaustion, yet steady with resolve. The herdsman leaned on his stick, his body weary, but his eyes alight with something more: purpose. The cub pressed against both lionesses, his faint purr the smallest sign of survival. For the first time, rivals rested shoulder to shoulder, bound by what they had protected. Atlas flicked his ears once, then stood still, a monument of strength. The vultures circled far overhead, disappointed, their feast denied. The plains pulsed with a new truth, that mercy, rare as rain and dry season, had prevailed. And beneath that truth lay the fragile sound of life continuing, stubborn, enduring, alive.
Night crept across the savannah, stars piercing the dark like scattered fire. The guardians remained where they had chosen to stand, unmoving, unyielding. The cub stirred, lifting his small head to press against Nalane's chest, then turning towards Suri. Each faint nuzzle carried weight greater than survival. It was trust. Atlas bent low, his vast head lowering until his breath stirred the dust at their feet. For a moment, giraffe, lion, man, and cub shared a silence that belonged to no one species, but to the plains itself. The herdsman whispered softly into the dark, words carried away by the wind. He did not own this moment. He was part of it, a witness to the miracle of unity. The predators had not prevailed, greed had been driven back, and in its place, something rarer than victory had been forged, an alliance carved from trust. Dawn returned with gold spilling across the horizon. The cub stood shakily, his legs trembling, yet his body lifted by determination. Nalane nuzzled him gently forward, Suri pressed at his side. Atlas towered behind them, his shadow stretching long. The herdsman leaned on his stick, watching with tired eyes, pride swelling within his chest. The hyenas never returned. The poacher's trail was lost to distance. Only life remained here. The cub's small cry carried into the morning, no longer desperate, but defiant. The plains answered with silence, as if bowing to resilience. Atlas turned slowly, striding back toward the grasslands, his duty fulfilled. The lionesses followed the cub into the distance, their rivalry forgotten. The herdsman remained behind, alone but no longer lonely. For in his memory, the sight of guardians standing as one would burn brighter than fire. And in that, he knew, miracles still walked the savannah.